when a user can't connect to the network, what do they usually blame? And this is a leading question, but yeah, what do they usually blame when they can't connect to the network? Me, yes. Brian, it's all your fault. Yeah, so we've got Wi-Fi, me, the network, Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi. No, yeah, that was a leading question. We all experience it, and I knew what the answer would be because we talk to network engineers all day, every day. But the Wi-Fi gets blamed. But as you all know, there's so many factors, even outside of the network, that can impact connectivity, devices, applications, DHCP, all the different things. And traditional monitoring doesn't capture all of that or reconcile it into an easy view to really see what the user experience is. And Wyebot, what we do is we fill that gap. So we provide sensors and agents that monitor the end user experience of the Wi-Fi and alert teams to issues and how to fix them before they impact users. So Wyebot has two ways of collecting and processing the data that feeds into our cloud platform. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jacob to kind of give an overview of the difference of these two devices and or systems and go into the demo. So Jacob, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So Wyebot has two, main ways we collect data, and they actually are complementary in a lot of ways. So one is our DEX sensor, which is a, all sort of purpose-built, standalone device, which you would deploy at scale on site, right? At environments you manage the network on. They're multi-radio, combination of passive scanning, active testing. So it's kind of got all the toolkit you need when you think about network engineering, Wi-Fi engineering utility, right? It's sort of that kind of all-in-one, ready to go, plug-and-play solution. But there's a challenge with any type of overlay that's statically deployed, which is you have clients, and those clients can be anywhere in the world, right? I mean, they could be working obviously in your office, they can work from home, they can work in a coffee shop. And how do you really monitor those connections? Well, the way to do it, of course, is to have an agent, right? And so what we have is an agent that actually runs on the laptops, and we have some great technology partnerships with our agent involving Intel, which gives us access to things like driver level statistics. So that's where our focus is going to be today. We're going to talk about our agent, talk about some use cases there. But yeah, just at a high level, right? I would say, when you think about how Ybot's generally deployed, it's the sensors in those, business critical environments where the network is managed by the IT team. And then the agent is deployed obviously on those end users, especially giving visibility into those, kind of hybrid situations, or the C-level staff or whatever, right? I mean, the agent kind of gets deployed, you know, across those clients. Yeah, I guess I'll pause there. Anything else, Mike, you wanted to tee off before we jump into the demo?
No, again, just stick around to the end. We're going to share how to get a free license to trial this solution. So, but yeah, on to you, Jacob.
Excellent. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And I always want to know let me know, is this coming through okay for everybody? Looks good. Um, okay, great. We'll go ahead and kind of just start jumping through this data. So what we see here is the UI for our agent platform. So I'll kind of talk through what we see here. The first thing I want to explain for everybody is just how this system works, right? How it's deployed, what it really looks like for the end users, that type of thing. So the agent is actually deployed right now for Windows. That's our primary, or that's the OS we work with right now. We're working on Mac OS and other OSs will be implemented in the future. But the way you deploy this is there's an executable or an Intune package. So if I click up here on our little question mark, directly from the UI, you can actually download the installer. So depending on what works for you, you can obviously deploy it ad hoc with EXE, maybe use some sort of PowerShell script to do that at scale. Or if you use Intune, we actually give you an Intune package. So it's very easy, of course, with Intune to manage this deployment at scale. Assign it to a security group, and then you're kind of off to the races um, with this deployment, right? And one thing I'll say with the installer, which is kind of cool, is we actually, have a binary that's built just for you as a customer, meaning You just run the installer, and at least with the current implementation, you don't add like a license key or anything like that. The device will just automatically register, assuming you have internet access to that client, right? Because this is a cloud-based platform, right? So you can easily manage it in that way. Now, in terms of what the end user sees, this actually runs entirely in the background. So it runs as a Windows service, meaning there isn't really a front-end UI for the end users. That was an intentional choice on our part, where we want to have this be out of the way, right? And very limited resource utilization, right? We try to keep it under 100 megs of RAM utilized. CPUs is extremely low. Um, so the point is, you would have this run on your active clients, and then, if they have a problem, we have this interface which I'll talk through that explains what those problems might be. And gives your team the ability to really troubleshoot these things, either live or after the fact with historical data, right? So that's kind of the general deployment. Now, a couple things I want to talk about in terms of how you kind of manage this. So what you have is this kind of page here where we have like a list of all the devices that are active right now. Now, when you have a lot of devices, you may want to actually group them in some capacity because we talked about some of the features we have. One of them is to run tests, right? And you might have tested certain websites. Well, not all users care about the same endpoints, right? So what you can do is assign labels to those devices. So as we can see here, we have a bunch of labels. Some devices are unlabeled, which means they'll run all the tests that are also unlabeled, right? But the point is you can kind of group your devices in this capacity. So that's all very easy to use. And then when you want to visualize this data, um, we have a few different levels of the interface where we have kind of a top level here where we have the list of devices. Now, you can see a list. You can also see a list of charts. And the charts are pretty cool because when you think about how you're going to interface with this, especially if you have a very wide deployment of this across your organization, you might need to understand, what the commonalities are when you deal with like wireless issues, band selection, things like that. So we have all these pie charts, and one thing that's really cool. We'll talk about the health score today. That's a big change to our product that I'll explain. But with any of these, right, I can click into a slice, and then it's going to re-render all of these charts just to show the devices that kind of match that filter, if you will. So again, the more data you have, the more useful this type of analysis is. But one thing you can use is actually identify maybe a specific driver version that is commonly the one that has a problem, right? Like maybe everybody with a certain driver version has a poor health score or is always on the 2.4 band or whatever the issue is, right? And now you have some justification if you need to go to the endpoint team and say, hey, we have to roll out a driver upgrade because, everybody on this driver version is all having the same problem, right? So that's one of the benefits, of course, of doing this type of monitoring at scale is you get some, different ways to visualize your inventory and it's based on actual performance, right? And you can see as well, right? Now, Wyebot, we have a lot of different people working in the office and then a lot of people working from home. So we have all sorts of different SSIDs seen in here. And that's a good example of kind of the ability to really monitor these clients wherever they are, right? So let me go back to our list view here. And I also want to talk about this health score. So this is something we recently added, I guess in the most recent update of the product, which is um, we collect a lot of data, right? Like all these, like I mentioned, driver level events. We're running tests, pings, speed tests, Teams calls, all sorts of things there. And that's great. But I think one of the challenges we always had was you kind of had to know what you're doing a little bit, right? And you click on a device and say, okay, well, we see this test failed at this time, and the device roamed a lot. So what we've decided to do is start to build a score which takes that data and processes it and gives you something that anybody can understand, right? You can look at a score and say, okay, and we even color coded to make it even easier, right? But once you start getting down into the 80s, down to the 70s, 50s, 40s, below, obviously that means your performance is worse, and the user is going to feel that, right? And that's one thing that was very important when we designed the score. We wanted to track the actual user experience, right? And not just give you a number that doesn't necessarily align with what they're feeling, right? Um, so kind of enough of that high level discussion. Let me click on a couple devices and talk about some specific examples of the sort of data that we collect, right? So maybe first let's look at Mark, right? He's kind of standing at the top here, and he's got a kind of a middling score, 84, not amazing and not terrible, I guess. But let's click on the device and maybe see what's going on. So I clicked into the device. You'll see the page is going to load here. Um, and now we have this interface. Now, if you're familiar with the Wyebot sensor product, you might recognize a lot of this because we took a lot of what the sensor does and tried to build a lot of that feature functionality into the agent. So, of course, it's familiar, and also, a lot of the stuff is actually very useful when you think about having your agents kind of act like sensors and the data they report. And one of the elements there is this list of issues where we have, that same kind of software stack that looks at, the data that we have access to and helps you identify issues, right? Configuration problems. Maybe there's video streaming devices nearby which are adding up to the airtime, that sort of stuff. It's good to know, right? When you think about that type of inventory. And um, we have the historical data as well with all this everything we're going to look at. So just keep that in mind as I click through this data. You have a month of historical logs you go back through. So at any point in time, you can see, what had happened, after the fact. Very powerful, right? Um, Now, additionally, we build data like the access points tile. So if I click on this, this is actually looking at, from the client's perspective, right, that scan data. So all those APs that client's able to see. Again, we have that Wybot has this method we use to actually correlate things like individual radios into access points. So if you've looked at other scanning tools, right, I mean, like the, Wi-Fi analyzer apps and stuff for your phone, they give you a list of BSSIDs, which is great. But you don't, it may mislead you a little bit, and you might think you have like, 12 APs when really you have, you know, one AP with six SSIDs per radio, right? So we try to correlate that. So we can see here, right here, Mark is connected to this Eero AP, which is a tri-band, right? He's got 6 GHz enabled here. It looks like if you look at this channel breakout, he's using 160 megahertz channel width here, which is, it's a lot of spectrum being used. So this also will print out all the other APs that we're able to see for this client. Again, the historical data is available, so we can see at any point in time which AP the client was connected to and all the other APs that client saw. So again, very important for forensic analysis, especially if you're trying to root out roaming issues or a coverage problem or whatever it is, right? You have the ability to go back and see all this data, which is really cool. Um, let me close this. Now, the event log is something I wanted to show you here with Mark because this is where we've actually seen some interesting events. Now, when I say events, what I mean is we log like all the sort of network sort of activity that this client goes through. So things like DHCP, um, also logging in, logging out, going into standby mode. So when you're looking at the time of events, you can sort of see what had happened. But I think the most important part here are these Wi-Fi events that we're getting. Now, I'll talk a little bit about our Intel partnership. So devices with Intel radios, which are very common, right? They're the market leader for Windows. We get these driver level statistics. So when a device roams, we get things like roaming reasons and we get beacon miscounts and that sort of thing. Now, I'll say if you don't have an Intel radio, that's fine. We still get a lot of data. So we can, it's pretty much feature parity, but there's a few things that are special with Intel that I wanted to mention. So if you have a lot of Intel radios in your device population, you definitely look at the agent because it exposes some pretty cool stuff. But let me show you these events I was interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and filter and see if I do this right. Let's actually be a network thing. So we want to look for, let's look for roaming events, right? So I'll apply this filter. Now I need to zoom out a little bit, right? Because he's been pretty much stationary today. So let's go to, past week. And this is what I was really interested in. So from a Wi-Fi nerd standpoint, I think this gets pretty exciting because what we're seeing is anytime this device roams, okay, of course you get the AP it was connected to, the disconnect event. I need to actually probably include the following connection. I think this is the right thing to do. So then we can see the connection afterwards. But the point is, right, we get the roaming event. We also get the roaming reason. So this is saying, and this is the message from the driver, right? It's saying, okay, our SSI was low, so we decided to roam. Or maybe the driver was being aggressive and found a better AP, so it was attracted to another access point to connect to. Or you get things like 11V, right? So if you have, things like load balancing turned on, or a lot of multi-band APs do this, especially in 5 and 6 gig. They'll use things like 11V, 802.11v, which is kind of the Wi-Fi standards way for the AP to essentially tell the client to connect somewhere else, right? And if your driver is going to honor that, that does in fact result um, in the client roaming, right? So I guess what I thought was interesting here is we actually see some if you really look closely at these events, right, you can actually find what I don't know why I just what did I do here? The point was there are events we can see which indicate that the OS is deciding to roam, or the driver is deciding to roam, or the AP is deciding to roam. And I think what the theme is, there's a lot of different elements that get to make decisions around when the device is roaming, even on the device itself, right? Your OS and your driver. And if those things don't agree, what you can get is kind of a ping pong behavior where the client goes to one AP and then goes to another AP, and that is going to result in the classic issue that you often have to troubleshoot. And the way you see this from your wireless controller is the client was on APA and then they were on APB and then went back to APA, and that's all very confusing, and maybe you even get a packet capture. And I mean, you see it happening. What you're not getting though with that type of analysis is this data, right? What actually happened on the OS, right? On the radio. So yeah, here's what I was showing you, right? It says tax roam by OS, and then the driver's like, nope, better AP found, right? So this sort of trend, if you see that, that actually indicates some major issues that the client's experiencing. And if you get those complaints like, oh, my call dropped for 1 second or something, a lot of times it's issues exactly like this, right? So um, just want to mention that. It's just one feature, but I think it's a really cool one to talk about. While we're here, let's actually, for the sake of variety, right? Let's go ahead and look at a different client. I think we can now focus on, let's look at Sean, right? So Sean's another one of our great sales members here, and we can see. Um, so maybe let's start by looking at the health score, right? So I want to talk about this interface a little bit. So this is actually taking, a lot of these metrics that we talked about, and it's giving you this score. Now, the way we build this interface, you can kind of see there's one thicker blue line, which is your overall score, and then there's actually the components within that, and those components are, you can see down here, Wi-Fi connection, Wi-Fi stability, network tests, and device performance. So if I expand a couple of these, right, we can actually see the underlying metrics that go into this. So what I mean by that is you can see Wi-Fi connection. So what this is telling you is sort of the quality of the at the time of connection, meaning when that client connected to an AP, was it a good, strong signal strength? Was it a appropriate band, right? We'll actually knock points off if you're connecting on 2.4, of course, right? Because that's not a good experience. We also look at things like if there's EAP involved, so this authentication is the EAP auth or DHCP response time. If that takes a very long time, obviously that's a problem. Interesting one here is the number of connection events. So this is saying, if your client is ping-ponging very frequently, right, that's bad. You don't want to have like a million connection events in a short period of time. So if we see that, we'll tell you, now he's been pretty stable here, right? Wi-Fi stability, this is more of the current, active connection at whatever time you're looking at, right? And again, you can scrub through historical data. But in this case, we're looking at the RSSI. Missed beacons, this is a cool one, right? So if your client misses beacon frames, what that means is, AP's beacon at some set interval, generally speaking, it's approximately 10 times, per second, right? And the radio is expecting to hear beacons at that interval. And if it doesn't, well, if it starts to happen too frequently, your client will definitely roam, right? It'll disconnect and move to a different AP, and that could be disruptive. So we log this, and if you have a ton of them, seven's not a lot, right? But if you have like, I don't know, 100 or something like that, your client might start roaming. Of course, data rates as well are looked at here. Moving on, we also look at network tests. So depending on the test you have configured, you'll get some scoring based on things like if you're running our Teams test, application test. So if you're starting to have failures there, right, that's going to knock back your score, obviously. The one interesting with Sean I want to talk about here is device performance. So this is looking at currently just CPU and memory utilization, right? And those I think are really the core things I like to look at when I'm just trying to understand from a device itself standpoint. Like, is this device overly utilized? And if so, right, you're going to start experiencing performance issues. The user might say that's a Wi-Fi problem because it might feel like a network issue. The website might load slowly, but if your memory's at 100%, I would say you probably have too many Chrome tabs open, right? It's not a network issue per se. But let's actually show you what I mean by this. So if we look at this from a further back kind of standpoint, you can see this trend where his things are mostly fine, but his device performance is really not doing super well, and it's actually trending in a way where it goes down, 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 and then actually it goes up. because I think he reboots. But if we look at these points of time, you can see cases where device performance was essentially pegged, right? CPU is completely utilized, memory is at 97%, which is terrible, right? That's not good. So this user is experiencing a problem. Um, but again, with just a basic sort of like, oh, ping loss, latency, whatever, Wi-Fi connection, you wouldn't really understand what the issue is. But we have this ability to look at the device performance itself, and obviously that's giving you that missing piece. Um, so anyway, I thought that was an interesting use case, right? And by the way, one thing we've been doing a little bit internally at Wyebot is if we see our users with low health scores, we'll actually reach out to them and say, hey, we're seeing this issue, right? Can you maybe go and disconnect and reconnect to the Wi-Fi, or check your settings? I think we found one case where we had a one of our users who was on this call who had set his inadvertently disabled any newer Wi-Fi standard, and knocked himself back to 802.11a and G rates. So we caught that, and then we reached out and fixed it, right? And that sort of thing is great. So I think the last initial use case I wanted to talk about is actually more application facing, right? With website response time and things like that. So for that, I'm going to look at Yvonne. Um, if we look at Yvonne here, right? So Yvonne's our kind of operations manager here, and one of the things that she does is she looks at the services that our team uses, and those are all important for our day to day. So we have this pipe drive, more pipe drives for CRM, and then we have some other things that are kind of in the link list here. So if I click on this, you'll see this little widget comes up where we have the test results. So just looking at this is one day. We can zoom out. Um, we start to see a bit of a trend if we sort of know how this user is working. So here we see, today, she's in the office. She's on the guest network. So this is something we'll catch as well, right? If a client's on the guest network, I mean, a lot of times that just means they probably don't have their authentication set up right, and they should be on the internal network. So we do log that, by the way. But anyway, so you see here, anyway, everything's fine. The tests are all working. The websites load quickly, whatever. But we see here, if I go back in time a little bit, here this is Yvonne's home network, and what's happening is one of these hosts, this air call, um, is actually failing DNS resolution, right? So on our home network, maybe the DNS provider from the ISP just doesn't resolve this endpoint, and or what it often is like you have a like a internal service, right? And that's a local DNS entry that you only access if you're on the appropriate network or the VPN or what have you. And so you might start seeing DNS resolution, and this again goes back in time. Very simple use case, to be honest, right? I mean, all we're doing is we have some. I think this test is just pinging, really. So it's pinging. It's doing the hostname resolution as part of that. And but what you're finding is the root cause of an issue that without this sort of data is a reactive process at best, right? You're working with that user directly. Maybe you're saying, okay, open command prompt and do this or that, and it's a lot of work. I mean, you're doing this manually, obviously. You have to get the user's time. So the other thing that's kind of cool with these tests is if you're in the situation where you're doing some ad hoc troubleshooting, you see there's little play buttons here. So you don't have to wait for the scheduler, right? You can just run a test on demand. And then you'll have results, in short order instead of kind of waiting for that test to run. So, I guess keep that in mind as well, right? I mean, we really want you to be proactive with this feature, but reactive situations are unavoidable, especially when you have a lot of users and you just need to fix something quickly. So log in, run the tests, right? Look at that data. And that's the goal with this platform, right? Is just to give you, kind of a force multiplier, right? These days, the issue is obviously you have clients that work from anywhere, as we had mentioned. So hopefully this sort of tool set is going to give you, or your help desk or whoever's going to be using this, right? What they need in terms of kind of fixing these problems. So we could talk more about some of the different tests we can support and some of the setup items. Maybe I'll pause for a moment and see. It looks like Anil has been answering some questions in the chat, which is great. I guess, Mike, I don't know if you've been reading the chat. Is there anything you want me to talk about live?
I think we've addressed everything that's been asked on the chat. So yeah, you're good to
Nice.
keep going.
I know I'm scrolling through, and Anil's like, he's a machine. Uh, awesome. All right, so I mean that's the main use cases. I'll talk about a couple of the feature things just so you guys know kind of how you set this thing up. So it's really honestly very straightforward. So what you'll do is create some tests. We actually have a default set of tests which gets turned on automatically, but you can adjust those, delete them, whatever you want. And again, this is all very familiar if you know our sensor product, right? You'll kind of make your test suite. Um, I'll kind of show you some of the options we have in here. So um, there's a few, right? And they're kind of the core ones that we like to see, right? I mean, your pings, your application, the link doctor. So again, this is kind of from our sensor, but this is where we do a sequential kind of check of the gateway availability, DNS, an internet IP, a host name. So you kind of get a good bang for your buck with that, right? Because it's making sure all those core services are up and telling you if they're not. Um, One thing I want to talk about here is the Teams test. So this is something that's actually unique to our agent. We have a Teams test on the sensor, but this one's different because this is one of the benefits of us being on Windows is we get access to some Windows tooling. Um, so Microsoft has this, what they call like the Microsoft Teams Network Assessment tool, which is an awesome command line utility. And what it does is it actually goes to Microsoft's Teams load balancer and it runs a test, right? It does a packet loss, latency, jitter to that endpoint using the protocols and traffic that a Teams call uses. And what that gives us is a very useful metric because even if you don't use Teams, um, what you're seeing is the network quality. And if you're working from home or whatever, I commonly experience this, right? I'll get a few percent packet loss. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's enough to really affect a real-time, video call, which we all know is a very frequent application. At least for me, I feel like I'm on video calls all day. So having this test is really cool. Um, Now, when you're setting up a test, I'd mentioned labeling earlier. So really what you do is you would also assign those same labels to the test, and then those tests will then run on the clients that you had labeled, right? Hopefully pretty straightforward. I mean, it's kind of a familiar concept with platforms like this. One thing that's actually unique here that I think is pretty cool is you see this little checkbox says only run on my SSID. So what does that mean? Well, there are situations I kind of mentioned one earlier, right, where you have a test that maybe is reaching an endpoint that you could only get to if you were on the corporate network, like a file server or something that's got a local DNS entry. So we have this tab, if I go in here, where you can flag the SSIDs that belong to you. I mean, it's very simple. All you do, maybe we'll do it live, right? If I click on a device or an SSID, you can see we actually give you a list like, okay, there's one client connected to SSID. This is my home network, right? And I'll add that. You see it's in the table. Now, that just means now those tests that have that flag enabled will run if the client is connected to the Wilson Phi SSID, or I guess Wyebot guess is the other one. I think we had reset this earlier. I don't know where Wyebot TLS is, but I believe with this list is based on the SSIDs that your clients connect to. And I think there may also be some that are just from the scan data that's passive. But if you don't see this in the list, you can actually manually enter. And again, we're not asking you for all the authentication parameters because what we're saying is this is just the SSID name. So it's very easy, right? You just put that in. Of course, it has to match exactly. But if you have that in, now you have this functionality enabled where you can selectively run those tests. It's almost like a dynamic labeling system. So it's pretty cool. Um, and it's kind of unique. I don't know. I haven't heard many other things that have this sort of approach. And we'll probably add more features and functionality to this My SSIDs things because it allows us to do a lot. But yeah, I mean that's kind of the I guess initial sort of walkthrough of the agent platform. So I think with the remaining time, Mike, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and maybe
Yeah,
answer
well,
one or
right
two.
after you asked if we'd answered all the questions, we got a flood of questions, Jacob. So let's go through those
Oh
just a
boy.
bit. Just starting at the top on Link Doctor, just wondering how far down that goes. Are you at the DHCP level, DHCP options? Do you want to talk a little bit more in detail about all the things that Link Doctor tests?
Yeah. So actually, so regarding DHCP, we do get metrics there. That's not part of the link doctor test. So maybe one thing I'll explain that's a little bit different from our sensor. So the sensor, when a sensor runs a test, it's actually making a new sort of full soup to nuts network connection. So the radius, the DHCP, all that stuff. Now we don't do that with the agent. Why? Well, we don't want to have your clients ever disconnect, right? In fact, we don't even tell them to do a scan. We wait for passive data to come in because we're very careful to not have this be a thing that can interrupt your end users, right? That being said, we do get DHCP metrics. Okay, so whenever a client that was weird. Whenever a client, connects to um, DHCP, we get the least duration. I believe we also get the DHCP response time, and that feeds in. If I go in here, it feeds into the health score, right? So if you look at this Wi-Fi connection score, you can see that one look kind of funky. This is have I found the bug with our beta? Here we go. Here's one that looks real. So like 14 milliseconds, right? Or maybe it'll be 2 seconds or 3 seconds or whatever, right? So that's collected passively, right? So in terms of where it fits in the stack, that's where it fits. DHCP options aren't something we're exposing currently on the UI. I mean, we expose the DNS server and the gateway, right? Those are classic DHCP options. We may do more with that. If you have a specific use case, we'd love to hear it, and we can kind of see if that's something we can implement. But Link Doctor, I'll show you here. So what that test is doing is, I mean, pretty straightforward, right? It's actually pinging the gateway IP, which is automatically, grabbed via DHCP. Similarly, it pings the primary DNS server, measuring, round trip time, response time, packet loss along the way. Then it pings the internet IP. Now, this internet IP you would specify, right? You can leave the default, which we just use the Google DNS, or you can put in whatever you want here. Similarly with a host name, right? We just use Google, but you could change that to something else. At the last step, we ping the resolved host name, which is sometimes useful because what you can have is maybe your DNS resolves the host name to something weird. I've seen this with like content filters that sort of intercept DNS and then point you to something that doesn't really respond the way you expect. So in any case, that's what Link Doctor does, right? It's just a sequential test, which gives you a lot of those core sort of health checks right off the bat. And then it plots, right? So if we have a problem where maybe we start dropping pings to the gateway, here we had an IPv6 gateway, looks like, and then that wasn't responding. This is reported, on this little visual with the test. Okay. All right, Mike,
Love
I'll let you
it.
kind of MC the question. So any other?
Yeah, yeah. So next one, if you want to test wired versus wireless, maybe this goes into the sensor a little bit, but can
Mhm.
you talk to if you do want to have a comparison between wired and wireless on the tests?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good question. So currently the way it works, so with the agent, the tests will run using whatever the network path that the OS is going to take. So if you have a client that is plugged into a dock or something like that, or just an Ethernet cable, I know people still use those sometimes, it'll run the tests on the wired connection. And I think we report that in the test result. So if you look at the interface type, interface name, it'll tell you. So you could go through here, and of course you could see your wired and your Wi-Fi and kind of see if there's any difference. And I'll talk about our sensor a little bit here too, because this is something the sensor specializes in. The sensor has multi-interface support just out of the box, so you can have wired tests and Wi-Fi tests running pretty much at the same time, right? Not directly at the same time, but in sequence, like one right after the other. Again, we don't do that with the agent yet. It's a little tricky, right, to deterministically tell the host OS to route traffic out a certain interface. We're still looking into it, right? I mean, if we could find a method to do that reliably, we definitely will want to implement it. And then when you configure the test, probably we'll have some option that says like run on wired or run on Wi-Fi. There's ways we could handle that, right, for sure. But yeah, it's a good question. And we have that covered right now with our sensor. We do with the agent as well in a way, but I think the sensor is probably the specialized approach there.
Cool. No, thanks, Jacob. Another question along those lines was just the value of the agent on wired devices.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk through that?
Yeah, for sure. So the agent absolutely does run on wired devices. Now, I will say a lot of what the agent does is focused around Wi-Fi, right? I mean, a lot of what we talked about, the access point list and all that, which by the way still works. If you have a wired device that has a Wi-Fi radio that's active, we can still get scan data from that client and report and build an AP list and things like that. But if you have no Wi-Fi card at all, or it's disabled or something like that, you'll still get metrics, DHCP response time, all that good stuff. You'll still be able to run all the tests that we talked about today. So there's still a lot of utility there, right, for a wired only client. So it's not a, all or nothing type of thing. But yeah, I mean, the most value is going to be a Wi-Fi connected device for sure, but it'll still work on wired clients.
Cool. Cool. And getting a few questions around the sensor versus the agent.
Mhm.
One, do the two platforms talk to each other? How do they integrate? And two, just kind of the feature parity or differences between the two. So I guess a little bit
Yeah,
more in depth. You gave a little bit of a heads up on this at the beginning, but maybe a little bit more in
yeah,
depth on the difference and how they work together.
yeah. So the sensor and the agent. Right now, they are actually independent platforms. So you'll have your sensor, which is on one dashboard. You'll have the agent that's on a different dashboard. I mean, they're both web-based, so you can just have one open in each tab. So it's not like we're in the days of Java desktop apps anymore, which is good, I guess. But yes, they are independent platforms, which was an intentional design, at least initially, right? Because we didn't want to shoehorn one product into the other. They're really fundamentally different from an architecture standpoint, and also a use case standpoint, right? I mean, they're complementary because the sensor is great for infrastructure monitoring and passive analysis, where the agent is good for your endpoints, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But right now they're independent. Now we are absolutely talking about ways to combine them together. And we would love to hear some feedback around how that approach would make sense. Either having everything on one dashboard, or maybe we have an overlay which takes the API from both systems. So we're absolutely gonna get something like that. But right now they are separate platforms, right? So and then the use case, right? One versus the other, speeds and feeds, right? I would say the sensor, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's a purpose-built device, right? So a lot of the stuff the sensor does, the agent can't do because we don't want the agent to start taking over your clients and turn your client into a sensor because that involves a lot of disconnecting and reconnecting and all sorts of stuff, right? So the sensor has this ability, of course, to be a little more robust in terms of the tests it can run. There's a lot more options there. You can run a lot more tests, right? Because that's what the sensor's for. It's you're allowed to kind of max it out in that way. Um, it also has multiple radios, right? So the sensor has the ability to take passive captures on multiple channels simultaneously. We have two radios that'll take captures on dedicated channels, meaning they don't time slice. They actually choose channels automatically based on nearby APs, or you can manually set them. It's up to you. And then we have a third radio, which is the one that runs the tests. When it's not running tests, it actually goes back into monitor mode, and you have a time slice capture. So you have all those captures running simultaneously on the sensor. So then you can log into the sensor and download a historical packet capture. It's very important to know that because you have that sort of logging available over the air. And then talking about the agent, a lot of stuff we talked about today, you can't get from a sensor because we're on the OS. We get access to this driver level intel data, all the DHP response from the client perspective. Obviously, running tests literally on the client device itself tells you a lot, right? If a client can get to a certain website from their device, you know what I mean? Like that tells you that the thing works. And if it doesn't, well, then that specific device might have a problem, but another device might not have that same problem. So, and also the other thing with the agent that's great is clients are highly mobile, right? They walk all over the place, and a challenge with any platform that tries to capture this stuff with packet captures is you got to be on the right channel at the right time in the right location. And I mean, unless you want to follow a client around with a sensor all day, which we've had people do that, right? They put a sensor on a Roomba and have it walk around the office. I've seen that before. Um, I'll still say the agent is excellent for roaming analysis because it captures all the roams and it's timestamped to the millisecond, right? So that's a couple of the use cases. There's more we could go into, but I think at a high level, that's how I like to explain it.
Love it. No, thanks, Jacob. Thank you. And I think most of these have been answered in the chat, but just a few things to highlight. People are asking about Mac OS, multiple questions on that. And yes, that's in the works. Wi-Fi 7 sensor, yes, that's in the works. And in the works, meaning like we're working on it. Like it's going to be an exciting year next year. Um, so I guess one other question, Jacob, WLPC,
I'll be
are
there.
we gonna be there?
I'll be there.
This
You
is
gonna
your
be there,
time to
Mike?
plug your session, Jacob.
Yeah, yeah. No, so I am actually, yeah, I'm grateful to be selected for a 10-minute, 10 talk at WLPC. What I'll be talking about actually is a little hobby project that I've been working on, which is a way to string together Linux utilities to do roams. So not really related to the agent. I think it's really cool though, and I'm excited to talk about that. And it's something that we're planning to implement on our sensor platform, but you know how WPC is, right? You can't go up there and do a sales pitch, and I don't want to. I just want to talk about how that kind of how I sort of came to that conclusion and how it works. So yeah, I'll be there. I think Mike, you're going to be there. We have Adam Wilson, if you guys know him. He's my brother. He's amazing, and he's going to be joining us as well. So yes, finally, right? Wyebot's going to have a multi-person presence at WLPC, so I'm not just kind of floating around on my own. I live in Phoenix, so it's kind of hard to not go to it. you know.
Yeah, no excuses. No, really excited for that. So, cool. Jacob, can I still the screen share here? Just wanted to
Yep.
share with everybody. We are happy to offer a free DEX agent trial. And what that looks like is there's a form. Let me just copy and paste this into the chat so it's easy to get to. But you would just fill out the more info form on the website, and in the last field, just put DEX agent trial. The team will reach out by email, figure out the best way to get that to you. So. Again, let me just find the chat. Perfect. So yeah, the link is in the chat. If you're watching the YouTube recording, it's in the description of the YouTube recording. Just in the last field, type Dex Agent trial, and we'll be in touch here. But oh, how long's the trial? What's the typical length of the trial, Jacob?
For the agent, I believe it's 30 days. Somebody in who's answering chat questions can probably correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, John, it
perfect.
can be
Yep.
extended. You're not supposed to say that. That's supposed to be a secret.
Just say, just say,
Yes,
just say your
our
friend
sales
Jacob's
team is
or
very much yes, they'll work with you as you whatever you need to evaluate. Looks like Troy can't see the link. Mike, you might want to
oh,
share it
I
again.
put it in the wrong spot. Here, we'll try that again. Okay, now it should be in the chat.
That's right. I
Okay.
know Anders the evening events. I think Mike, I don't know if you're going to talk about that with the WPC people, but we would love to do one. I think it's
Yeah,
if
we're
we
on the list to
can
do
fill
it.
that.
On the list to do
Are
it.
we?
So we'll
Fair
throw
enough.
together something fun.
We'll talk more about it.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you everybody for jumping on. Again, Jacob, for the presentations. Great. Big fan of the Dex Agent. It saved my life a few times already. And yeah, so excited to get this out there. So reach out, fill out the form, and we'll be talking. So have a good day, everybody. We'll see you.
Thanks, folks.